is Ed Story, who is actually president and CEO of Pharos Energy. And it's great to see you back, Ed.
Great to see you, Malky.
I tell you what, when we last spoke, which was actually in person in the studio, you were talking me through the Egypt deal before, when it was actually going ahead.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have thought that it would be so long before you started to only this week announce the sort of progress of the drilling and then the farm out and then the drilling again. But before we start, I wonder if you could, just for those people who don't know too much about it, give a bit of an overview of Pharos, just a sort of thumbnail sketch, and what it looks like after recent corporate activity.
So we actually began life with a position in the Far East, and the Vietnam assets that we had, we've been there like 20 years. So we've evolved out of Southeast Asia. We went to a number of different places. And in fact, we kind of gave birth to Cairns' position in India because we had an Australian company that we were the control shareholders. We sold it to Cairns. So we've been a number of places. Historically, we've realized value on the assets when they mature, and we've returned over $500 million to shareholders over that period of time. So I think we're a bit exceptional in that in terms of our sector. So going back a few years ago, as you mentioned, the Egyptian piece of it, we were stagnated in Vietnam at the time, and I'll describe that in a moment. So we were looking for other things to do. And so the Merlon assets were in the Western Desert of Egypt. I knew the people from a previous life, and we acquired those assets. We learned two things. It takes a long time to do anything in Egypt. Two, you probably don't want to buy from private equity. So the prolonged period, actually there was no care and attention given, and I can't fault them for that. So we inherited something that needed a quick injection and jumpstart. And so we had begun that at the time the pandemic set in, and obviously all bets were off at that juncture. So we then went through, took the opportunity, restructured the terms, and have now got in a position that we're proceeding with the farm out to IPR. And I'll describe that all in a bit later. So that's the Egyptian bit. Vietnam, shall I just jump into Vietnam?
Yeah, I was going to ask you next to go into Vietnam in a bit more detail. Why don't you go straight in and give us the chapter and verse on Vietnam?
So we, as I said, we were there over 20 years ago. We've developed and had 4 first oil parties. So that's a significant milestone. We found oil, gas, and we did it 4 times and put it on production. So the largest field is the TGT field, and they're all offshore on either side of Bac Ho, the giant field of Vietnam. So we have said about TGT that the key to TGT is continuing to drill. So there are many different sections, take points, and enhanced recovery techniques. And we reached a period that PetroVietnam could not identify with that for whatever reason. So in 2019, a high member of government suggested that I campaign. So I spent a lot of time there, made a lot of presentations, and created an awareness that we had produced 150 million barrels of oil equivalent, and we had contributed $4.5 billion to their government through our 2 ventures. And that made an impression. So we went into 2020 with a whole different perspective and mindset. And obviously the pandemic in some ways helped that mindset, because we then put together new field development plans. We had 6 firm wells approved at TGT and 2 to come forward on CNV, the other field. And we got a 2-year extension in the exploration licenses. So we walked into 20 and 2021 with 4 farm wells that we drilled in TGT. And the cost environment was ideal because we drilled them for $20 million less than the budget. The wells pay out in about 4 months.
Right.
And we increased the productive capacity of the field by 1/3. Now, we've had an issue on a compressor, so we won't realize that full rate for a month or 2, but the earth has spoken. It's spoken and it works. So one of the things about the whole Vietnam thing is that we go through lengthy interactive management committee meetings. And now the time zones are not working in my favor. So I've had, of the past 5 nights, 4 almost all-nighters going through MCMs, but they've all been concluded. And so the resolution on TGT is that we are adding 2 more wells to be drilled next year and 1 well to add to the C and V drilling. But perhaps more importantly, the excitement level within Petro-Vietnam on what we've done this year is contagious. So they are quite anxious to move further to the west of the TGT area, where we had the 2 best wells that came in well over 2,000 barrels a day, and map more anomalies, drill more wells, and go forward. The juice is that in order to do that, we'll need a further extension in the license. So they have asked that we put that as a top priority and extend the license there to 2031 and C and V to 2032. So it's a whole new world there, is my point. And it's the production is very, very attractive. It trades at a premium to Brent. And what's good about all this is that Vietnam is the new emerging economy in that part of the world. And they have taken over a lot of the manufacturing processes, their shoes, apparel, clothes, whatever, that was in China at an explosive GDP growth rate. So they're burning a lot of coal for energy. So we are doing our ESG contribution by backing out coal.
Yeah. So just to firm something up, when you were talking about the wells, do the blocks 125 and 126 come into what you were just talking about, or are they so icing on the cake someplace else?
It's someplace else, but it's the most exciting thing I've ever seen. And I'll tell you some background there. So our exploration manager put this whole concept together in 20 years ago. And so he and I have been trying to capture the opportunity for the past 10 years. So we go back with this thing, and it's been held in Russian related hands because the acreage offsets the Kamran Bay naval institutions. The Russians gave 2 kilo class submarines to hold the acreage. They never did anything, nothing with it. So we brought in a Vietnamese partner, a private partner, to meet a content of Vietnamese ownership. So we have 70% and our partner has 30%. And we just concluded 2 management committee meetings, the most recent last night for it. We acquired 3D data this year, much lower cost than anybody expected. And we're going through the detailed processing with milestones into this year, first quarter next year, into second quarter, to define specific prospects. Now we have mapped leads where we have indicative, indications from the 2-dimensional seismic of structuring. So we mapped those leads and we focused the 3D in 2 areas. One is a shallower water area and one is a deeper water area. So the leads, if you just take them and look at the comparison to the Kulong Basin, where Bok Ho and TGT and C&D are, they're similar in size. So we're talking about a mature basin that's produced 2 billion barrels, and we're comparing it to a basin that's never had a well. There, just to the north, there was a well that had some black oil. So we have a strong belief there is oil in the basin, and we're going to find the best place to drill 1 or 2 wells come 2023.
Yeah, so this year, next year, 3D, and then drilling in 23.
Yeah.
While we're on just finishing on Vietnam, you mentioned that you're looking forward to traveling east. Has it been as closed down as anywhere else out there? Are you allowed to go back yet?
So the way it's evolved, they survived the initial wave quite well, both Thailand and Vietnam. We were there during that period. And then the Delta variant really set them back. And as of now, Vietnam is still pretty much locked in. And the concern is that their famous holiday Tet, the Lunar New Year, all the expatriate Vietnamese, about 1 million of them, come into Vietnam. So it's most unlikely it will open until after that.
Yeah.
So I've got my ticket almost ready to go as soon as it opens.
Good stuff. Should we take a look at Egypt? Yeah. I'm lucky enough to have been over there see your assets with Mike and the team just before the lockdown. Tell us, what you've been up to. You obviously you started and then you had to stop and then you've just started again and you've done the farm out. Tell us all about it.
So the whole issue in Egypt. So there are 2 things about it. One, it was a regressive series of terms. So in a low oil price environment, it was a killer. Okay. And in a low oil price environment in Vietnam, it was fine, but not in Egypt. So in 2020, we worked to have the terms changed and improved. So we got that done. And then earlier in the period, we had done a water flood program to show the response and enhanced recovery by water flood. And that works. So the fundamentals were all there. The point is, it takes significant capital to make it work. And also there are equipment issues about getting rigs because it's become a very popular place. So we concluded to do a farm out of 55%, and we went through a beauty contest, and a company called IPR based in Dallas, Improved Petroleum Recovery. They've been there for 40 years. So it's an Egyptian family, well placed, well located, well connected. They have rigs of their own. And so we're in the process, the circular on the farm out, they will acquire 55%. There's cash, there's a $38 million carry for a couple of years. And at the end of the day, to us, it's cash flow at no cost, basically, for a couple of years. Now, we've kicked off just another program here to keep it all going and alive until the farm out closes. So the expectation is we'll have the circular out next week. We'll have an AGM or EGM around mid-December and look to close very early next year. So at that point, it's IPRs to operate. In the meantime, we intend to drill 3 wells to get the production up and demonstrate the future there. So it's cash flow.
Yeah, and I'll come back to maybe the third leg in a minute, but just before we go on to sort of finances and so on, I mean, your experience as anyone I know, what's your feeling about the macro position for hydrocarbons and energy at the moment? I think that most people are beginning to get a bit more positive, myself included.
I think yes. I think in terms of the future outlook, I mean, we're all believers in, the ESG concerns and all of that sort of thing. On the other hand, it's a bit premature to say we're going to be able to throw the better quality hydrocarbons out the window, if you will. So natural gas, if we talk about natural gas, like in Vietnam, there's a lot of CO2 associated with it. So it is not the solution. So if we are backing out coal, as I said we were doing in Vietnam, so I just think there's little activity to support what will be a lingering demand far beyond when people see it. My other concern is that the Asian side of it may well negate the European side in terms of reducing carbon emissions, because fundamentally, other than scrambling for LNG, which is driving the price, they're dependent on coal.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be some change in it, but I do, as we look forward to the near term and maybe even the longer term, I think we're going to be in a very solid price environment because we don't have the activity.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's the view I've got. And I've had, as I said, a week in Houston last weekend, speaking to, I mean, the people that I speak to who are close to OPEC, for example, say that the people in OPEC are as positive as they have been for many years about the medium term, and and what the president has done today won't make any difference to that, as we said. But
No question.
I'd love to have a quick look at the funding and the financing of how Pharos looks now that you've completed the Egypt deal. Obviously, a guide to how the balance sheet looks, what your capex is going to be like for the next couple of years with the various places, and so on, and give us an idea of how the money position looks at the moment, if you would, Ed.
So we're obviously in Egypt. It's cash generative, and so that's on its own. Vietnam is highly cash generative. So we're in a situation. So as I said, we drill 4 TGT wells this year. We'll only drill 2 next year. So the 4 that we drill will kick in substantial cash flow. So I'm not going to give you a number, but I will say we're going to be back in the game. And when I'm talking about the game, I'm talking about returning capital to shareholders. And so we're quite anxious to get the farm out put to bed, to get some stabilized production in Egypt, and then define a dividend policy, if you will.
I mean, that was going to, yeah, I mean, a dividend policy is I've got a question here all on its own, and you've, to a certain extent, answered it, because, of course, in a previous life, you were, a very substantial payer, and you're proving now, as you said, with drilling the wells in Vietnam and getting them cheaper, and with Egypt being a producer, you'd expect to return to the list and be a decent player of dividends in the sort of reasonably foreseeable future.
Malky, my wife brought that up just the other evening. She's saying, "What are you doing there? You're putting more money back into the company than you're taking out." And I said, "Well, sometimes you have to do that."
But you're a young man, Ed. I think we can give you. You've got plenty of time.
Right.
You've got time on your hands. So is it just Vietnam and Egypt then, or are you going to let Mike and Jan and the team get off and find a third leg to the stool?
So in actual fact, we at this point in time intend to focus on Southeast Asia, and I would say Vietnam specifically, because we have several other opportunities there of a different risk category than what we've talked about in 125 and 126. And we intend to explore those. We know the place, we know the people, and it's more family, if you will, than walking into a brand new situation. So we have ideas going forward there that could be very substantial.
Great stuff. We're running a bit tight on time, but I have to ask everybody about ESG. You've mentioned it fleetingly in passing. What's the Pharos ESG offering for the potential investors and so on?
So I think it's just really understanding who we are and what we do. So I mentioned Vietnam. We're making dramatic impacts there in terms of oil versus coal, backing out coal. So that is our mantra there. In Egypt, we went through a number of different modifications to the power sources for the compressors and all that sort of thing. It will be up to IPR to continue that as the operator. So, and Malky, we're also beginning to get a good feeling from the Vietnamese about their commitment to ESG and climate change as well. Nonetheless, their economy is the driver.
Yeah. Well, there's no reason that shouldn't be a positive thing. We're nearly time out. So can I ask you the usual final question, Ed, if I may, is, putting all that together, all the things that you told us today, very exciting prospects and the upside for 125, 126 and so on. Where would you like to see Pharos in, say, 18 months' time?
So 18 months.
Mid-2023.
We'll be drilling a well, and a few weeks later, we'll tell you about a big discovery that would transform everything you know about this company. I mean, if you can envision a 1 billion barrel prospect on a little company like Pharos, it's the lottery.
And you own a lot of it.
It doesn't happen in this business often, but when you have that exposure and you can manage the risk and manage the cost and potentially bring partners in to share in that, which we've always done, it doesn't get any better.
Yeah, and you talk to potential partners in that part of the world all the time.
They follow our seismic processing quarterly.
Good. Well, it's really very kind of you to take time out to speak to me today, Ed. Thank you very much indeed.
Malky, it's my pleasure. We'll have to have a glass of wine sometime soon, okay?
I would like that if you can get yourself over here. But,
I shall.
Thank you very much. So I've been Malcolm Graham Wood doing my CEO interview on Core London. My guest today has been Ed Story, who is the president and CEO of Pharos Energy. Thank you very much for joining me, Ed, and I look forward to seeing you and everybody else later. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Malky.